So good afternoon to you all. I'm Jane Beavis. I'm chair of OPRL, the On-Pack Recycling Label. It's been our great pleasure to celebrate our 10th birthday by being involved in sponsoring the EcoPack stage again this year, and been very gratified with the level of interest throughout the show on all the different seminars that have been happening. And I know you've already seen one or two of our speakers today. So this afternoon we have two sessions. The first is looking at how we design packaging correctly in the first place for a circular economy, and then we're going to follow that up with how we actually engage consumers as a vital part of that circular economy, and ensuring that we do harvest that packaging back again. So I was just admiring the boy band we have before us for the first session this afternoon. All marvellous speakers. I have warned them about this, and this is no not impugning any of them at all, but at OPRL we have set ourselves a commitment to have gender balanced panels wherever possible. So ladies, where are you? We need you to step forward and get involved in the debate. Four excellent experts this afternoon, but I'm sure there's a lot of expertise sitting in the audience as well. Please email us at OPRL if you are happy to be involved in panels in the future, because as we help put together these sorts of events, we're going to make sure that we get more women involved in sharing their insights and expertise. However, we'll make the most of the boys this afternoon. So we're first of all going to hear from Peter Maddox from WRAP, and I'll give a little lead in to Peter in a minute, because if you've been watching the news today, you will see that WRAP and OPRL have made a joint announcement today. And Peter's going to talk about the waste hierarchy and circularity. Then Stuart Foster from Recoup is going to talk about the designing and sort of involved in making sure how packaging comes back as feedstock. Paul from Church and Dwight is going to give a brand insight into all of this and how that fits with the business of doing business. And then finally, Andy Rees from Wales is going to sort of give that overall insight from government, and hopefully a little insight from the local authority side of things. And I think Andy's going to touch on issues raised in the consultation released last week as well. And we're going to do all of that in 45 minutes. So I'll hand over to Peter, and he'll talk a little more about how we're going to be working together.
I will mention that, certainly. Yeah, so thank you, Jane, and I just for your leadership on the diversity debate. I mean, I completely agree. We need to have more diverse panels in occasions like this. So first of all, I just want to say, it's absolutely great that sustainability is really coming on the agenda in packaging. And I think one of the real challenges that we've got when we talk about sustainability is what exactly do we mean? So we've been concerned about climate change for a long time. There's now the real concern about plastics in the oceans. There's also the concern about biodiversity. So how do we think about, sustainability with such a complex space? So one of the things, the proposal I want to put to you is that if you go for a circular economy, make things to be designed to stay in the economy, we keep them in the economy, that will address climate change, that will address these issues about plastics in the oceans, it will address biodiversity and a whole range of things. So the circular economy as a framework is a really exciting concept that you guys need to be thinking about every day. It's really vital. But what I really want to say was tell you a bit about the UK Plastics Pact. So we set up the UK Plastics Pact in WRAP 10 months ago. It's been an absolutely incredible journey. We've got 76 members signed up to the pact who are committed to the targets in the pact. And one of the things that we said we'd do in our first year was really get clarity on what we mean by recyclable, because it's a really complicated issue. It gets to the heart of the whole design issue. So to count as recyclable, a pack has to be collected, it has to be sorted, it has to be reprocessed, and it has to go to a market. And it has to be able to do that at scale, and it has to work. So basically, just about every plastic pack is technically recyclable, but it's got to be done at scale. So the definition that we've agreed in PACT, and that's with work that we've done with so many of the PACT members. So these are the people who put packaging on the market. We've talked to reprocessors, we've talked to suppliers, we've talked to designers, we've talked to our colleagues, like Recoup, who have been supporting as an OPRL. And we've decided to designate certain things that are recyclable. This will help drive change in the industry. So what do I mean by designating? What I want to do is designate things that do not count as recyclable for some of the rigid formats we talk about, particularly for the consumer market. And some of these things, what we're saying is that no PVC in the plastic pack, no polystyrene. What we're also saying, little things like small things. So what we're saying that if you've got a bottle and you've got a cap on that bottle, you've got to design that bottle so the cap actually stays attached to the bottle. Or if you can't do that, you have to have it really clear on the label that when you finish drinking your drink out that bottle, you put the cap back on the bottle before recycling. If you do that, that bottle will count as recyclable. And we've done a whole range of other things that we're working with the business that will help to drive the change. So obviously, conversely, what it means is that rigid packs based on HDPE, polypropylene, and PET are essentially recyclable. Ideally, we want those packs to be clear. We don't want colour in them, ideally, as much as possible. But these are the things that are going to count as recyclable. And what you hear is that we're seeing a real narrowing of the number of polymers and pack types we put on the market. That's going to make it easier for consumers. It means that every time they buy a plastic pack, a rigid plastic pack in the home, if their local authority provides the service, they can put it in their recycling and they know it will be recycled and it will go back to a market and it will retain value, it will create jobs, and it's genuinely going to create a circular economy for plastics. So I think one point to know is that this isn't kind of stuck in stone. This is a fast-moving area. So innovation is critical in this whole piece. So as innovation develops, as you design new concepts and new packs, as reprocessing technology develops, there may be other categories of packs that will be defined as recyclable. So this is a moving beast. And right up to delivering the pack targets in 2025, I'm expecting us to review what is recyclable on a fairly regular basis. So the really good news is that OPRL are really going to align with that. OPRL have been one of the biggest supporters of the pack right from the launch. They are going to align their label, a simple binary label, is it recyclable or is it not recyclable, with the definitions we've agreed in the pact, and I guess that's going to happen over the summer. And this is really, really important, and this is about working together. And one of the things really, as part of the work that we've been doing with OPRL, this is really realised that Jane and I have realised that we need to work much closer together in a much more strategic way. And that was why yesterday RAP and OPRL announced our strategic partnership. We are going to try and think about how we can together really improve the whole recycling of packaging across the UK and really move forward a lot quicker. So I'm really excited about that, delighted to be working with Jane and her team. So just to finish off really, I just want to say, look, as packaging designers, as packaging manufacturers, you need to be very, very aware that this is actually coming and prepare for the reality. Some of these retailers and brands are going to be removing certain plastics, certain formats from their lines. So, and remembering that the UK Plastics Pact members, they represent 80% of all the supermarket sales that take place. So you're talking about a huge change, and this is what matters. And also remember that by the end of 2019, these PACT members will be taking action on these things. They will be removing things. It's a huge opportunity. So I urge you all really to watch this space, listen to what your customers are asking for, and make these changes and really change the circular economy for plastics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So Peter's given us the context. Stuart, I think, is going to give us a few more specifics, and so Peter's mentioned both the importance of choice of materials, but also the way you design things, so which is Stuart's expertise.
Okay, so Stuart Foster, CEO from Recoup. The intention is I'm actually going to build a bit on what Peter said, all of which I agree with. So design for recycling is a bit of a journey we've been on for a while. We actually started looking at this in the 90s and the packs that were coming through, and actually even then certain organisations came to us and said, is this pack we've got actually going to get through those recycling systems? Over that time, the collections, the sorting and handling and the reprocessing has changed, but actually a lot of the principles remain the same. And that's not just for the UK. Actually, the principles of recycling apply across Europe and globally as well. So for a number of you that might deal with international markets, actually by following those principles, you're readying yourself for the global approach to better design for recycling. In terms of the journey we've been on, in 2006 we produced the first freely available guidance document that covers all plastics packaging. That's downloadable from our website today, and every single one of you should definitely get on there and have a look at it. It goes through some of the principles and actually talks about the detail of polymers and all the different areas that might affect recyclability in practical terms. From the polymer type, the colour as we've heard, the adhesives, the components, the labels and so on. And it starts to build up a picture of what you could actually do practically to improve your packaging to allow it to be recycled in a sensible way. But more recently we've actually recognised that you don't all have the same knowledge on packaging and plastics, and your counterparts and colleagues don't either. So we need to make sure the information we're giving you can actually be used throughout your organisation. So to do that, one of the documents that was then produced with the BPF is a technical summary guide, which links back to our full 70-page guide. Again, that's freely downloadable, and I encourage you all to look at it. But again, it doesn't stop there, because there's a realisation that these principles that Peter talks about are really important. And if we can drive those home and embed them in everyone's organisations, that's going to be the way forward to improve recyclability. I checked just before I got up on stage. Again, that document is freely available through the UK Pact and through Recoup. It's a nice purple looking document, and here we go. And you'll see actually it sets out quite nicely the guides that are available, and it says things like no PVC. It says actually multi-layer laminates are an issue. It says PVC sleeves, silicone valves, non-removable film lids and so on. So the challenge is make sure everybody in your organisation has the right copy of that document. Second of all, we're talking about recyclability, but actually we're also interested in wider sustainability. So we're interested in that value chain. A, can it be recycled or not? But B, how can you ensure that when your material flows through, it's worth £200 per tonne to a waste management company, not £20 per tonne, because that will help the value chain. And also, more importantly still, what about litter? We're all being pressured because of the litter issue. So if we can design products to reduce littering through the tear-off bits, through the tethered caps and so on, that's got to be a way forward as well. Hands up how many of you have actually been to a sorting facility or a plastic reprocessing facility? Okay, so one of our aims is this time next year, everybody puts their hand up. It is so important for you to actually go and see these facilities. And actually, whether it's through the Pact or through Recoup or OPRL, maybe I feel a joint bus journey coming on. Let's go and have a look at the facilities, because you'll see there's a lot of common sense as to how those systems work. Practically, they will sort paper from 3D items, and you will see the different systems working there. So if you have a tray that's too flat, it may go with the paper instead of the plastics. You will actually see the infrared systems that have been installed, and you will see the manual sorting that goes on as well, and why we're putting these principles in place. So we're asking you actually to do your bit. We're up here as the panel, but actually the power is with you to start making these changes, and we will help you along every step of that journey. One final thing I need to say is the last 18 months we've spent as much time putting right mistruths and misconceptions as we have moving forward. We're seeing stuff in the press and in the media about recycling rates that are wrong, We're seeing stuff in the press that talks about certain packaging types that aren't recyclable when they are. So again, you'll find a number of evidence papers on our website to actually make sure what the media and politicians are reporting does actually represent the facts and the truths that we're looking at. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stuart. Absolutely. Confusion reigns at certain times, and certainly during the silly season, we've had some very odd stories to cope with. But there are certainly plenty of challenges for us all to address. One of the things that we've done to help members is to bring to the UK the PREP tool, which actually replicates the whole sortation and reprocessing infrastructure so that you can test those design ideas before you actually go into production and understand whether in reality here in the UK that is recyclable. And again, we will be updating the parameters of that to reflect the outcome of the Plastics Pact. So, we've heard a lot of theory. What's it like in practice, Paul?
Hope you can hear me now. Oh, yes. Circularity. Rhymes with hilarity, but I can assure you that any global brand owner is not actually taking this as a laughing matter. As a global brand owner at Church & Dwight, we have global facilities in the UK, Europe, and in the USA. We have to look at the overall global distribution of product, and so it's really important that we look at every single aspect of that global distribution at the beginning of our brand launch, the brand concept. So as with most manufacturers, all of the things that we do are actually based on cost, because at the end of the day we are a business, and we have to work with retailers who want to make that profit as low as possible. And apologies to any retailers that are actually available, but it happens to be a fact of life. So from that perspective, we have to look at everything from a manufacturing point of view. We have to make sure that we have a center of excellence for the particular manufacturer of a particular product. And within that, we have to involve, there are a lot of robotics and the manufacturing process. I talk to lots of production directors who insist that they can produce at maximum efficiency. So when I suggest that we go to a different type of packaging material, their eyes roll over, and I then get "Ooh, not on my facility." So it's very much a situation where we have to work really, really carefully on testing the materials. And I think one of the questions was actually to see who could help us. And I think I've been working on sustainable materials for 25 years now. And a lot of the materials, we started off with PLA back in the 90s, where that material just didn't work. And so from a manufacturing point of view, trying to run it through a manufacturing facility at a certain speed and filling at a certain weight and for it to perform in a global distribution situation never worked. And so from that perspective, we now have technology within the bioplastics area which will make it worthwhile. And I'm glad to say that our production directors are now looking for changes to lightweighting of plastics, reduction of plastics, and using bioplastics. So from a global brand perspective, it's really important that we work with internally from a manufacturing point of view, but also externally with third parties who may be manufacturing our particular types of products. So from that perspective also, we need to work as a collaboration, both with internal departments, marketing, procurement, quality, and production, to be able to make sure that that product is designed and evaluated right at the beginning of the concept, before we even talk about launch dates and everything else. So from a sustainability point of view, we would do the analysis, map out all of the areas that we would be distributing to, look for the transit testing, physical testing of the product, looking at the way in which that product would actually go through the production. And in most cases, in modern production sites, we are talking robotics. So once you set a program for a robot, nobody wants to change it. There is a massive cost. So from that perspective, we have to get everything right up front and make sure that is designed correctly for that particular outlet. And we have to select the right manufacturing location for that to work as well. So from a design perspective, we are doing analysis in terms of the mapping, the transit, but we're also looking to add a sustainability matrix to that particular product to make sure it goes through. So getting involved with the marketing people and having the technical expertise behind it. And I would also include your component manufacturers and your bottle suppliers who you need to work with to be able to deliver that. So from that perspective, where manufacturing it is really important to make sure that all of the people, there is a real collaboration. And because we are pressurized by retailers, we need to work with people like WRAP and Recoup and with governments to be able to deliver. And when you're doing a global brand, we have to reach a middle ground which will satisfy all of those requirements. I can see for the future actually global brands being very middle ground, but much more natural products being on a localized area. So reuse of product, of containers, refilling, doing that type of thing on a localized area, or for particular governments, is possible. But from a global brand perspective, we have to try and meet a general standard which will work across the globe in every continent.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess we'll have the opportunity to see whether the taking the plastic pact to a number of other countries will provide the opportunity to give a more consistent framework for international brands. So Andy is going to give us a picture of perhaps, Wales has already got closer to where we're all trying to travel to and the lessons that have learned from that, and a little look to the future.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm head of waste strategy for the Welsh Government, so I guess I'm representing government here, and you can throw the rotten tomatoes at me as you wish. As I've come all the way from Wales, quick plug for Wales, waste was devolved to Wales in 1999 when devolution happened, so that is 20 years ago, and still some people don't actually realise that. So we set our own laws and our own taxes, in some cases, in relation to waste. We set a recycling target of 70% for 2025, way above what the European Commission had set at the time. We have plenty of control already over how we set our legislation. We set our local authorities statutory recycling targets. We're the only administration in the UK to do that. So they've had to achieve various targets along the way to 70% in 2025, with a threat of a fine if they don't achieve it. So we're now at 63% recycling for municipal waste, and we're actually third in the world in terms of household waste recycling. So we're quite proud of that. Alongside that, of course, it means our local authorities collect the full range of materials, and particularly on plastics, they all collect bottles, pots, tubs, and trays, and some of them collect plastic film, although that is a challenge. And there's currently a trial in Merthyr Tydfil Council to collect plastic film separately in a survival bag alongside the rest of the plastics. But too much of this plastic, and also our waste paper and card, is being exported. There's been the big issue of packaging export recovery notes, which may be new to quite a lot of you, but basically the quirk of the system is it allows highly contaminated plastic packaging to go abroad, but all of it counts as recycling towards the packaging regulations. Now the Chinese have banned various imports of plastic packaging, plastic recycling, and I'm sure you've all seen pictures in the media, and there will be more, I can assure you, of individual bits of plastic with the brands identified, illegally managed in various countries around the world. Do you want that to happen to your brand? Probably not. However, so why is it all going abroad? Well, we have very little recycled content in most of the plastic products manufactured in Wales and in the rest of the UK. And we have the same issue with fibre-based products, apart from UPM, who do recycled newsprint. So we're aiming to increase the recycled content in Welsh manufacturing, first plastics and then second fibres. We've asked Wrap Cymru to map out the industries, and they've done that for plastics. So I keep waving this. This is their plastics route map that makes various recommendations to us on how to increase the use of recycled content in plastic manufacturing in Wales. Obviously, we have components manufactured, full products, and also packaging manufactured in Wales. The study is identifying barriers, of which I'm sure you're aware of most of them, costs being one of them, perception of quality being another, and also being able to source the right amount of quality recyclate being another barrier. And then thirdly, we need to overcome those barriers together. So this Wrap Plastics route map, I think, is certainly the first in the UK and one of the first in the world to try and address this problem. So it's specifically for Wales. Perhaps that may be emulated further, and perhaps the Plastics Pact may also delve into that area. We need to increase plastic recycling and sourcing and reprocessing capacity in Wales, and we are actively courting large plastic recycling companies to come to Wales. What's this space? We want to incentivise manufacturers to use recycled content in advance of the plastics tax. I don't think anyone's actually mentioned that today. So if you put plastic packaging onto the market after a certain date that doesn't have 30% recycled content, you will be taxed. Don't know what level, but to incentivise you to have that 30% minimum level. But in advance of that, we want to help our Welsh manufacturing industries. So we have a £6.5 million circular economy capital investment fund next year to help that. Also, we want to incentivise recycled content through public sector procurement. Maybe things like this, which we buy quite a lot of, should have a high recycled content. I ought to know, but I don't. Right, finally, I must cover extended producer responsibility. We've heard quite a lot about deposit return scheme today, but I haven't heard an awful lot about extended producer responsibility. How many of you are aware of the consultation document that was published 10 days ago on extended producer responsibility? Okay, not that many. It will be a game changer for all of you putting packaging onto the market. Absolute game changer. More than you could possibly imagine unless you've actually read the document. So please read it. It's out for consultation until the 13th of May. So you've got 12 weeks to read it alongside the deposit return scheme and plastics tax. One of the key elements of it is a proposal for a modulated fee based upon the degree of recyclability of that packaging and some other criteria that are put in there in terms of the consultation. Also, the concept of full net cost recovery. So those putting those products onto the market will need to pay for the full end-of-life cost of the management of that waste. Not just the recycling bit, but also the residual, also behaviour change campaigns, and also litter. So that might mean that those putting products onto the market that are heavily littered will have to pay to clear up all of those littered items. So think about that one. So read the consultation. Closed-loop recycling is the government, all of us in government are trying to promote that as much as possible, but I understand the difficulties there. So that means recycling a plastic water bottle, oh, it's gone there, back into a plastic water bottle. Sometimes there are some technical issues there, so please comment on that. And remember, recycled content, you have post-consumer recycled content, or every type of recycled content, and every type of recycled content could include the offcuts in the manufacturing. That shouldn't really count. It should be the post-consumer recycled content. So we'll certainly be lobbying HMT to consider that. There'll also be tighter controls on exports to try and close off the export of highly contaminated plastic. And the Norwegians are currently proposing to amend the transfrontier shipment regulations under the Bâle Convention so that plastic waste will no longer be green waste listed, which will make it a lot more difficult to export contaminated plastic waste and plastic packaging. So just to re-emphasize, please read those documents. There are major issues in there for all of you in terms of packaging, and government has got to get this right, so it's really important that we have your consultation responses in due course. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy. And I would absolutely echo this. We are at a moment of tremendous change in packaging. And even by the time we meet here again next year, we're going to be a lot further down the route of having truly sustainable packaging, establishing the basis for that circularity, and the potential for significant penalties where we fail to do that. So just coming back to what is the purpose of packaging, I'd be interested particularly to hear from Paul. I mean, you touched on the need to involve marketing right at the beginning as well as the technical aspects. What's the trade-off between these different purposes that packaging is there for, protecting the product, doing the marketing, efficient transport, and being truly sustainable, and how that impacts on brand value?
It's very much consumer driven, because we only produce products that consumers are willing to buy. From a distribution point of view, the type of product that we have within different markets, it's really important that we get the balance right in terms of the material, that it is recyclable. It's not always the case that we could go down a compostable route, for instance, because composting can actually ruin the recycling ability. We do quite a lot with aluminium. 78% of aluminium produced totally in the whole of the world for millenniums actually is still available, and it's recycled all the time. So if we can think more about the type of recycling facilities that are available, and the simplify things for the consumer so they understand that this can be recycled really easily. Using a PET bottle or using a polypropylene bottle should not be an issue in terms of recyclability. And if we can make it simple and easy for people like in the Chartered Institute of Waste Management to be able to recycle these things and add value to it. So from a value perspective, the amount of money they can make from recycling, because everybody has to make a profit within the chain. If we can actually simplify the plastic materials, lightweight them, do everything we can to reduce them as much as possible, but still keep them simple so they can fit the recycling stream. From my perspective, certainly I've looked very much at biodegradability and composting, and that doesn't seem to add up in terms of the analysis for those types of materials versus simple recycling of standard plastics that will do the job for you on a global basis.
Yeah. So, Stuart, you touched on the fact that a lot of these issues actually it's the same issue being faced everywhere, and so the solutions that work in the UK are by and large going to be the solutions that work everywhere else.
With minor changes depending on which country, and what they want to try to do. Yeah. But in most instances, it is true that one type of packaging that will get your product to the consumer through its life cycle and through the recycling system to get that circularity moving is actually the right way to go.
Sure. Peter, I believe the Plastic Pact has been replicated now in other countries, and there was always the aspiration, but it's actually happening now. So between Stuart and Peter, are there things we need to be doing at the international level that help us solve things at the local level?
So, to some extent, the international pace is being set by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who've done an absolutely brilliant job to raise awareness of this whole issue of plastics leaking into the environment and the need to have circularity. But what was really exciting about what we did in the UK was the recognition that actually if you want to implement some of that, the action, you do need to kind of take some of that context of the national level. The idea of just having a global pact to start with is really difficult. So what we found, in the UK, and we should all be hugely proud of it, the UK established the first plastics pact in the world based on some global parameters that WRAP developed with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So yes, there are indeed other pacts being created around the world. Only this week, the Netherlands and France announced their own plastics pact. Yes, they are slightly different from the UK one. I think that's perfectly reasonable. And one of the great things, and we're very excited in that we've had the opportunity to work with countries around the world who are looking to us, they're seeing what we're doing, and they just want to try out the same thing in their regions and their parts of the world. So yes, it is happening, and it's, as Mike Barry said when we launched the UK Plastics Pact, it's hugely groundbreaking what we did, and he said the world is watching, and we really have found that. And what's really great is the retailers and the brands and the reprocessors have come together and worked with us, and those. Certainly the big global players who are beginning to see this as something that they can replicate in other parts of the world. So hugely exciting.
And at the technical level, Stuart?
Yeah, I mean, particularly in the developing countries of the world, they shouldn't be focusing too much on the design of a bit of packaging compared to stopping the wholesale littering of plastics into the environment. So I think there is a much bigger waste management requirement out there before they get to the stage where we are, which is, okay, how do we make all the blocks fit together? And there are companies like Waste Aid and others out there doing fantastic work in that space. We kind of artfully dodged all the consultation stuff to leave the government official to talk about it, but actually we used to stand up here kind of pleading with everyone to say, can you make your stuff more recyclable? Well, there's always been that discussion around, well, we could, but there's usually a cost implication, there's usually something that's going to affect us. Well, because of all the tax discussions and all the penalty discussions, one way or another, it's going to be made the cheapest option to follow the right guidance. So if you're following this now, all you're doing is getting a bit ahead of the game. What I would say on a technical level, though, I'm really concerned that the timescales don't match up between the funding that might come through extended responsibility and the infrastructure that's going to be needed for you all to put 30% recycled content into your packaging. And whilst we really welcome any Welsh developments, which is coming through, there's over 1 million tonnes of plastic packaging collected for recycling in the UK, and 2/3 of that was going out to non-UK markets. We're not talking about 1 or 2 more facilities, we're talking about 10, 15, 20, and they kind of need to happen within the next year.
Open up questions to the audience, conscious of the fact that we've only got about 10 minutes left. Anybody want to make any points? Lady here in the green.
Could I just ask, to what extent do the panel see compostable and biodegradable fitting in with a circular economy?
Go on, Andy.
You might have heard me asking a question earlier today. Under some circumstances, compostable packaging will have a role, but there are the broad issues that worry me, and I have got a bit of a technical background, are that the compostable material at the moment, certainly PLA, disappears into water and carbon dioxide if you find the right type of composting facility to manage it. That type of material adds no value whatsoever to the compost. So when you use the word compostable, you have this lovely image of this lovely compost at the end of the day, and I'm helping contribute to it. Actually, you're not at all, because polylactic acid is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen compound. So it's not circular at all. If you can put it into your home compost bin, and that's a big if, it's almost like a disposal route. It adding no value to your home compost. Normal plastic can be recycled, whereas compostable plastic can't. So, and also our food waste collection service, most of it in Wales, goes to anaerobic digestion. That cannot digest PLA type compostable plastic. So I put my compostable plastic, if I ever buy anything in it, in my residual bin, because it's the only place to put it. Is that part of a circular economy? Not really.
Peter.
So when I think about compostables and biodegradables, you need to think about it in terms of finding the parallels of what we mean by recyclable. So when I talked about what I mean by recyclable, I said it had to be collectible, had to be sortable, had to be reprocessable, had to go to a market. It's exactly the same with a compostable, for example. So if it's truly compostable, it has to be able to be collected, it has to be able to be sorted, and it has to go to a market. And the challenge that I really would never want to say no to any innovation, but the challenge for people who put compostables and biodegradables on the market is exactly that point. What's going to happen when it has served its primary purpose as a pack? It's at the end of life. So people at home, I've got a bit of compostable or biodegradable packaging. What do I do with it? Do I put it in my recycling bin and contaminate what is perfectly good high-value materials? No. Do I put it into the black bin where it can create climate change, create CO2 and methane in landfill? So there's some real problems. So the whole point about systemic thinking and sustainability, people put these materials on the market, people who specify these materials, have really got to look at the full life cycle of those materials. So at the moment, I don't actually see that happening. And I think it's a real challenge for people in that sector to really kind of step up and really demonstrate that they're prepared to invest in communication to consumers, putting the right labeling on the packaging, even thinking about how do we make sure those materials go to the right composting infrastructure or industrial composters. They've got to step up. That's what it means to be a sustainable packs. And so at the moment, as far as I'm concerned, it's not there.
I think from a compostable point of view, composting needs a lot of criteria to be satisfied for anything to degrade. And if you have one of those elements that's not there, it will not compost properly. It can take 5 years. Can you imagine you taking your packaging from things that you think is compostable and put it into your compost heap? It would fill your garden within the first 3 months. So from that perspective, that doesn't work. Biodegradable. Most of the plastics that we see in the oceans are part of the oxidegradable plastics that have actually broken down into micromolecules and actually have flowed out through the water systems into the oceans. So, biodegradable plastic is not truly biodegradable. Fish are now eating those molecules, and there's information saying that up to 57% of oceans around Korea, in analysis, is actually full of viscose molecules, because the actual wipes that are used and flushable, supposedly, actually are breaking down and actually polluting the oceans. So from that perspective, I think we've got to rethink that model in terms of biodegradability and compostability.
Another question. Lady here. We're rebalancing the panel with the questioners, so that...
Hello. So from a manufacturing point of view, I think we're fully aware of our responsibility to look for the recyclability side of things and help educate consumers around it. What is happening to educate consumers about how they can recycle their materials and the different kinds of polymers and what they do and what circular economy is? Because as an industry, we talk about it all the time, but I don't really see massive campaigns out there in the news, other than negative publicity, about how to actually create a circular economy and what it means and what the different plastics are. That would be my question.
So our next panel hopefully is going to answer lots of that question, but whilst we have Andy and Peter here, just tee that up for us.
So I think it's a great question, and you're absolutely right. We need better communications. I am hopeful that when we have the reform of producer responsibility, that there will be an injection of funds in the right way, and we can create that kind of national campaign and get that consistent campaign to explain to consumers what kind of plastics need to go into what kind of bin or bag or whatever, imagine a world where every council actually collected exactly the same things. Imagine the world that the only rigid plastics that were put on the market were all recyclable. And so it would be quite easy to do, but you're absolutely right. We need more comms. We need to explain that point. But I think the other angle about packaging, and just you're talking about the recycling, but I think one of the challenges we have as the packaging industry is explaining the importance of packaging to in terms of protecting goods, saving the incredibly high carbon or water footprint of some of the foods we buy, the high value electronics. Packaging has a really important purpose, and too often the packaging is regarded as a rather inconvenient, unnecessary thing. It isn't. So that's another role there in terms of communicating that really important thing. I don't know if you can.
And 1 minute from Andy, and then we'll swiftly change across to our panel who will tell us all about how to do this.
Just in the EPR consultation, there was this section on mandatory labelling to actually then inform the public what can and can't be recycled. Obviously linked back to the modulated fee. So read that consultation document. There's a lot in there covering lots of issues and people's concerns.
Okay. Just a quick one from a manufacturing point of view. Sorry, yeah. With all our consumer research feedback is that consumers are completely confused about what to recycle and where. And I think the way forward is to simplify things as much as possible. If we simplify the packaging materials, simplify the communication, most people will be able to put it in the right recycling stream for us to then generate value within the chain.
Last word, Stuart.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring this back round to design, because what we're also seeing is people trying to get around design guidance by putting in mechanisms that they say, well, our stuff's not recyclable, but if we get the consumer to do this and this and this, then it might be. Tear strips are one example of that. So just pointing out and bringing it back to the design side, that we can only ask the consumer to do as much as they want to allow us to do that recycling journey. So I'm a bit concerned about possibly, the next panel will cover off how we do it. I'm convinced how not to do it is over ask the consumer to do lots of things with their own packaging.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thanks our panel. And in particular, this time round, we are exploring how we recruit consumers to be part of the circular economy. The big challenge that we have is that we have materials and packaging within corporate ownership all the way around the chain in terms of developing the materials, the packaging, the products, getting them into stores. Then we give it all to 60 million people and hope it comes back. And that's the problem that we're facing today. We've got an excellent panel. Carol Taylor is here from LARAC to talk about the local authority perspective on things. Joss is from RB and looking at things very much from a brand and manufacturer's point of view. And Paul from Greggs, who obviously as a high street retailer dealing with sort of pretty instant consumption in many cases, is looking at a consumer with perhaps slightly different behaviours from those of Joss's customers. So we're going to sort of follow the packaging through the chain, if you like, and start with Joss.
Okay, so a little bit of context. Reckitt Benckiser is not a particularly consumer-facing brand. It's a holding company, essentially, for a number of household brands. The stuff that you will recognise are brands like Vanish, Finish, Airwick, Dettol, and so on. So ultimately, what we're looking to do is ensure that we still have a business 10, 20, 30 years from now. So the notion of circularity, from our point of view, actually is the essence of sustainability. So if you ask, why is it important to us to alter consumer behaviour, actually the question is, why is it important to us to alter our behaviour first? Because the responsibility sits with the brand owners. We've spent 50 years explaining to people why it's a good idea to consume, providing products that meet people's needs and make everyone's lives a little bit easier in lots of little tiny ways. But actually, ultimately, we're responsible for that. So I think the first step is to acknowledge that responsibility, understand the landscape, as we've been discussing today, and then start to think about how much of that responsibility should we actually push onto the consumer. I think the gentleman that made the comment at the very end of the last discussion kind of highlighted exactly that point. It's our responsibility. Why should we expect someone else to do it? So I think we've got to be very careful about working out what are the areas that we should ask someone else to do, and the areas that we have to change about our supply chain, about the way we talk to people generally, our marketing, the types of products we produce. So it has to be a systemic approach. And actually plastics are only one part of it. I realise that's the focus of today's discussion, but there are 17 SDGs for a reason, you know. And I think we've got to understand how to apply all of that thinking to business as a whole, because if we don't, we won't still be here in 10 to 20 years. And I think the start point for me as a brand owner is to think about engagement. So if we want to build a better engagement with consumers to have the kind of effects that we're talking about, because let's be honest, no one currently who buys a Vanish product is likely to automatically think about how to recycle it appropriately, how to dispose of it appropriately. To get that higher level of engagement in some of the categories that we play in, where people have an intermittent relationship with the product, and in some cases no relationship with the brand, we've got to build some meaning into the brand. So I would talk about it as a shift from trying to stand out, so in a shelf context, more latterly in an e-com context. We've got to shift from standing out to finding out and telling people what we stand for. And taking responsibility openly for the consumption that we've helped to drive over the 50 years or so of mass consumerism, let's say, I think is the first step. We have to be open about that. So changing consumer behaviour, first of all, relies on us changing our behaviour, and being very open about how far we believe we can get down that journey immediately. So there's a really nice example of a brand in the Netherlands where we're based, called Tony's Chocolonely. It's relatively good quality chocolate. I'm not a chocolate aficionado, so I don't know how good it is. But their story is one of anti-slavery. So they try to ensure that every step in their value chain incorporates responsible business practices. Now, whether that's the sourcing, whether it's the farming, whether it's the manufacture processes, the shipping, etc. But what they say is, we are trying to do this. Here's the progress we've made so far. There's a big gap yet, because there are some things we absolutely can't track or we can't influence. We're doing this to meet those needs. And I think the brand is way more credible for it. And I think that's the first step we have to take, is to be open and honest about, first of all, our role in arriving at where we're at and having to deal with the X million tons of plastic that are floating around in oceans and people's backyards. And then be open about how much we can do to change that immediately and what we're doing to change it long term.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So that's producing the things that we have in our cupboards and by and large stay in our cupboards for quite a while as we consume them. Paul, you're dealing with almost sort of instant consumption in many cases with your customers.
Yeah.
In that sort of consumption, are consumers really bothered about sustainability?
We're starting to see lots more interest. But I need to say, so Jane said before, you can sit down or you can stand up and prance around. I'll do the prance around bit. We're starting to see consumers really asking lots and lots of questions about this now, much more than they did in the past. Greg, we're very lucky at Greggs. We've had a sustainability strategy in place for a number of years, focusing on carbon like everybody else, with some discussion around packaging and our influence on packaging choices for our personal sort of Greggs customers, which obviously changed. So the inference changed probably, I would say, 3 years ago with some of the activity around coffee cups, which I will come back to why that's a good example, and then Blue Planet. So Blue Planet created a bit of a storm, not only with our consumers, so we got lots of anecdotal feedback from our consumers, but also from our own people as well, who are also consumers of our goods as well as everybody else's. So it's changed the thought process, so consumers are now looking for brands to be doing the right thing. So they're really pushing us now, asking us the questions about what are you doing in terms of trying to make life easier for us. There is an expectation that we do lots and lots of that activity on their behalf. which we're going to have to try and help change and help shape, which makes things very difficult for us as an individual brand or as a collective brand as well. Because we can do our part. One of the things Greggs is really good at doing is, like a good manufacturer, everything we do back of house, we own and we manage and we can control because we've got a processing system there. All of the goods that you'll see transferred around Greggs estate are on a circular economy-based tray. It's really good because David's the guy who invented those for us. But it's a tray, it's a plastic tray. It gets used. At the end of its life, it gets chopped up. It gets made into trays again. That's great because it's back of house. Our problem is what happens front of house. So as soon as goods go out of our door, what can we do to help that consumer do the right thing? We work very closely with other coffee retailers. So the coffee cup example that I used earlier, from a challenge from Hugh Fearnley-Whittenstall, we came together as an industry and says, right, we're going to do these things to make life easier for the coffee drinker to be able to dispose of his cup in the right way. So we work closely with OPRL, we work closely with local councils, we work closely with national government around agreeing, right, what's the process we're all going to follow. So whether you're a Costa, a Greggs, a Starbucks or a Pret customer, you will know what to do with your coffee cup and where to go. And I think that's what we've got to take with all of our packaging choices as well. We've got to come together. That collaboration is really, really important. So we can come together as an industry. So a very lazy UK consumer, as in myself, knows that when he gets that bit of packaging, wherever he gets it from and wherever he is at that time, there is an infrastructure for where you can place it.
Thanks very much, Paul. And that's a really interesting example of where the existing home collections infrastructure that we all know and supposedly know how to interact with doesn't actually meet the need for that type of consumption, and therefore new infrastructure has to be put in place, and it's the producers, the coffee shops that have done that. Carol, your members are absolutely at the front line of trying to collect all of this packaging back and get it into the right streams so that it truly can be circular.
Yeah, so just to introduce myself, I'm the chair of LARAC, which is a Local Authority Recycling Advisory Committee, and I've just worked out why there isn't a lot of female panellists, because we've got nowhere to put that. So I'm carrying it around with me. I'll try not to trip over it. We represent 70% of local authority waste and recycling officers that do the bin collections, that dispose of your waste, that run the household waste centres across the country. And I'm chair of that organisation 1 day a week. The rest of the week, I actually work for a waste collection authority. I work for Pendle Council, which is in East Lancashire, and I look after the bin men and produce the publicity that we give to consumers to help encourage them recycle more. Now, local authorities have seen a lot of change over the last 10 years. Our budget has shrunk by 60%. We've had huge cuts. But we mustn't forget that our current household recycling rate is around 45%, when just 15 years ago it was less than 20%. So in terms of engaging residents, I think we've done a lot already, and I think councils should be commended for bringing about that change and the expansion of what we now have, recycling collection services at the curbside. To show of hands, how many have a curbside collection service they collect from your house? Pretty much everybody, yeah. I mean, I remember, I've been in waste 25 years, and I remember when there was no curbside collection and we just had bottle banks on supermarket car parks. I think some people are too young just to remember that. And people were demanding we start recycling plastics. We are recycling plastics. So what can we do to get our residents recycling more and participating more? The government's resources and waste strategy is looking to consistency of waste collections, making sure that we all do the same thing, along with deposit return schemes, DRS, and extended producer responsibility to fund more recycling. As was mentioned in the previous panel, consultations are out now, and I do urge that you read at least those 3. It might take a long while to do, but we've got 12 weeks. Now, 100% of local authorities collect cans and paper at the curbside, 99% collect card and plastic bottles, and 89% collect glass. And additionally, there are 77% that collect plastic pots, tubs and trays. So in effect, we've got quite a wide consistency approach already, so we just need to get it that bit more. for packaging waste. We're hoping that EPR, Extended Producer Responsibility, will make a real change to product and packaging design so that non-recyclable packaging is no longer used, and will help us introduce more collection systems and get us to that 100% consistency. I looked at some surveys, and there was a Britain Thinks survey last year which asked 2,000 members of the public about their attitudes to waste and recycling. They found that 81% of respondents think their council's current recycling system is convenient. They also asked them how could it be improved, and the majority said that they wanted schemes not only to be convenient and efficient, but rewarding as well. Some suggested that gamification or incentives from manufacturers would encourage them to recycle more. However, contrary to this, there was a reward and recognition fund run by DEFRA between 2001 and 2014, which explored approaches for rewarding and recognising behaviour and to encourage people to recycle more. £2 million of the funding was put into this to encourage more recycling. Now, although we saw some cost savings achieved by some, overall it was found that they were expensive to run and appeared to cost more than the savings that they were generating. This was particularly evident for curbside collection schemes, which tended to only experience a marginal increase in recycling tonnage. And the DEFRA did a review by Brooke Lyndhurst, which concluded in 2016, overall schemes did not experience a sea change in recycling tonnage, participation or claim behaviour. So I think what we're seeing here in the surveys, people are saying they want to do more, but they're not actually doing more when it comes to delivering the goods. We've heard the media, and it's been spoken here today, about people are confused by all the hundreds of different recycling schemes out there. There's basically about 6, maybe 7, yes, different coloured bins, but I think people tend to know what goes in their recycling bin at home. What the confusion is why can't they recycle other things that say they're recyclable on the packaging? And that's where the labelling comes involved. I think we need a standardised system of clear labelling, essential so people know exactly what it is and how it can be recycled. LARAC is an owner of OPRL, and we'd like to see that adopted on all packaging. And the intention is to make it a binary system, so it's either yes or no, and the check locally hopefully will disappear. And also, we want to remove a lot of the other labels that are on packaging. I stood in supermarkets in November, 3 different supermarkets in my borough, talking to people about recycling. They are confused about all this and what means it's recyclable. Most of those don't mean it's recyclable. So finally, I think we need also people taking ownership for what they purchase and what waste they're creating. We need to see behaviour change at the end of the day, and we've heard that Blue Planet 2 has motivated people to call for more action. Again, as a council employee, we get told we're not doing enough, but we have schemes out there. I've just explained nearly 100% coverage on most materials that are packaging. But how many people have actually made a change since Blue Planet 2? If they don't change and they're not engaged, and all the systems and services that we give, well, won't give us circular economy at all.
Thanks very much, Carol. And actually, you teed up a question that I wanted to explore. We did some consumer insight work at the end of November, about a year on from Blue Planet, to see how people, what people's attitudes were towards recycling, and indeed whether they understood our labels and how they work. And what was very clear was that the 18 to 35-year-old age group, who have been amongst the most exercised over Blue Planet, are still largely disengaged from recycling, particularly if they live in houses of multiple occupation, and even worse if they're also students. So we have a real challenge as to how we reach out to that group of consumers. Paul and Joss, how do you go about that?
I think there are 2 areas that I would say are linked directly to what you were talking about, and both are, I'm going to come back to the point I made earlier, both are entirely the responsibility of the producer, let's say the brand owner. One is to take the choice away from the consumer, because as you've said, we have a massive disparity between the level of stated understanding from the consumer and actual behaviour. It's normal in most areas, but this one's particularly impactful. So I think we can address the two kind of age dynamics, let's say, in two different ways. First, remove the choice. And I think that's one of the things that can be done immediately by brand owners, is start to make the selection for a properly recyclable material, for instance, or a material that can be put into a fully circular economy in a particular geography. So I'm not just talking about the UK here, we work everywhere. And I think we have to make those choices for consumers. We see that there's a level of stated engagement, but if the action doesn't follow, then we need to take the action. And I firmly believe that there's a very limited amount of the behavioural shift that we should be able to push onto individual consumers. I don't think that's appropriate at all. And the second thing actually plays really nicely on the point you made about gamification. We think of gamification as a relatively kind of young dynamic, but in actual fact, all it means is we need to understand what's relevant and what's meaningful to that consumer. What's the value exchange that consumer is prepared to make in order to take some action that maybe is different to their normal behaviour. So once you understand their currency, and I think this is, I'll hypothesise that maybe this is where it's difficult for local councils in the UK, for instance, your ability to reward that consumer in a currency that's meaningful for them is probably quite limited. Whereas if you're the brand owner, the person that's bought the product is already engaged in the need state or the mindset that surrounds that category. So you're already in the place that you can provide them with an appropriate currency, some kind of remittance, whether financial or otherwise, that actually makes it worthwhile them doing what we believe they should do as a responsible user of that product.
So it's, again, some consumer insight work we did as we were developing our We Recycle app, which has all sorts of possibilities of having those conversations with consumers in a much more interactive way, but showed that for quite a lot of people, actually, they just wanted a feel-good factor that they were doing the right thing. They didn't necessarily want a financial reward as such. They wanted to understand how they were making the world, and in particular their local community, a better place. Paul, your customers are often consuming out of the home. To what extent do you hope that the extended producer responsibility will provide the kind of infrastructure that needs to support effective recycling in that situation?
I think that's a big plus for us. For when the consultation came out, that was one of the things that we looked at straight away. So of the 4 consultations, the PRN reform element, but also that consistency and the building of an infrastructure from that funding would be fantastic for us as a brand, but also as from a sector perspective as well. I think one thing, just following on from Joss, one thing I would say around consumers is that thing about the consumers buying into the brand, so they've already created that relationship with you. So we can use our messaging and all of our marketing tools and all of our nudge opportunities to try and drive that consumer, or try and educate that consumer into doing the right thing. We've done similar research in terms of ours was 16 to 24-year-old males. We did some work with DEFRA. They're the problem from a littering perspective. The work we did with DEFRA very clearly show that that demographic were not going to take notice of something that DEFRA produced. So what they did is they're looking to work with brands who the consumers, that group of consumer, have got a link with already. So we're doing quite a lot of work around littering on that from that perspective, to try and drive that behaviour change. And I think that's where, to me, I think there's 2 parts to this challenge, if you want. There's that government element of creating that infrastructure and creating that process opportunity out across the UK. But then I think all brands, good brands, should be using all of their own internal tools to make sure that that customer gets that good feeling from buying your product and does the right thing on the back of it.
Brilliant. And obviously, Carol, the other agency that has an established relationship is the local council with its residents. We know that the 2 major sources of information customers look to is what's on the packaging, and they're
Yeah.
being told by the brand owner, and that what comes through their letterbox in the council leaflet. Will EPR enable you to do more work in this area?
Well, we do hope so, in that, I mean, at the moment, I think the producers are only paying about 10% of the cost of actually doing all the packaging recycling. So we want to see more funding coming towards local authorities to be able to expand those schemes. We also want, like I said before, we want to make sure that it is a recyclable product and that there's an end market for it. We heard in the previous panel how there's been difficulties in the markets. People always want to know where their recycling goes, where it ends up. Is it really being recycled, or is it just being shipped abroad and dumped in a landfill site? That's one of the main questions we get all the time. But we have that information there. We put it on our leaflets, we put it on the websites. I think it's going back to consumers taking ownership in a way. The information is there, the infrastructure's there. It's up to them to do the right thing at the end of the day. I mean, we can provide more on-the-go facilities. We have done in the past, but a lot of the on-the-go bins that we provide are just used as litter bins because people see it as a bin and anything goes in there. So a lot of the time, even though it might be plastic bottles or cans, it's full of rubbish. We are emptying it as a rubbish bin. So we're hoping that, I mean, there's talk of the deposit return scheme introducing, deposits that will help recycle more. We're not convinced yet that would work. I'm just still not convinced that people will recycle more through deposit returns, especially what we've just heard about. People aren't that bothered about getting the rewards back. So I don't know, it's a difficult one. I mean, but every year, we produce leaflets like this, post it through the letterbox, tell people what they can recycle and how, and yet we're still hearing people are confused.
Right. Now, with apologies to everybody, I now have to recycle myself. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Alice Harlock, our membership manager. And Alice, I think maybe just a little bit of reflection of what's coming out of the Leeds trials on the go would be a useful insight, and enjoy the rest of the show.
Hi. So we've been working closely with Hubbub and Leeds City Council on a trial where they've been looking at on-the-go bins and trying to get people to think about recycling on the go more. So what they've done is gone for quite a bright and engaging approach. So the bins that they've used are actually bright yellow, and they are trying to capture people as they are out and about with their on-the-go things. So specifically looking at making sure they have a bin to capture beverage containers, and that wherever they have an on-the-go bin, they also have a waste bin next to it, so that you're not getting on-the-go recycling materials and then being contaminated with the waste materials as well. And one of the things we've been doing is obviously we've been able to plug that data into our We Recycle app that we're piloting up there. So as a consumer, when you're out and about, if you're looking to know what you can do with your packaging when you're finished with it, you can scan the barcode and it will pop up and tell you where your local bins are, which I think is really useful and hopefully something that people will find really beneficial. So I think we should have an opportunity to take some questions from the floor. I'm just looking to see, hopefully we've got a mic at the back. So we've got obviously our panel here for a few more minutes. If anyone has got any questions, did you want to raise your hand? If not, I have got, oh no, I've got a question over here, please.
So most of what you've talked about is about recycling, but recycling is a relatively low value form of circular economy. What should we be doing to encourage reuse or completely reducing the waste or getting rid of the waste in the first place?
Go on then, Joss. Yeah, too.
Yeah, so this perhaps connects to the intro that I gave. I think as brand owners, the notion of taking responsibility for the full value chain, let's say, of whatever we end up supplying, whether it's product or services, I think means that we've got to think way further than we have historically about these kind of small incremental changes. So to your point, improving recyclability, for instance, or creating pull for recyclers to provide better quality materials or put more money into local council collections to enable better raw material. But those are still small steps. We need to think about what do we need to do to change our business model to include a more service-oriented proposition to the consumer, for instance. I think there's quite a nice example that's has been publicised recently by Tide in the US. And it's kind of hit the news a little bit because it's a change from supplying a consumable product to a service. Actually, they've been trying this for nearly 10 years and trying to get to a point where the nature of that service provided actually meets the requirements of the consumer. So this point about relevance, about fitting into behaviour, about making sure that you're able to provide a value exchange that actually means something to the person that you want to use your service. They appear to have just got it right. So this is a little bit like the use of QR codes, for instance. QR codes have been around for 20 years. Just now, 18 months ago, Apple decided to incorporate it into the iOS for their phone, and suddenly, boom, you can use a QR code for everything, and it's super useful. We may have just seen the first vaguely successful transition from conventional laundry products to clean clothes in your home to a service that can be delivered in a responsible manner, so with minimal, let's say, collateral sustainability damage, and actually meets a consumer need. The issue that we find is that big businesses like mine or like the I think P&G owned Tide, is that the risk aversion when you get to that level is colossal. So any significant change tends to be you need to demonstrate it in a small scale, or it happens in one market only. What we need to do is just simply be bolder as brand owners and start to take some of these principles and apply them literally globally. I think this is where you see there's such a level of complexity, hearing the difficulty that's faced here in the UK. That's just one market in kind of getting what we would probably internally talk about as consumer compliance in recycling. But trying to change behaviour on a global scale with millions of different inputs from a consumer behaviour point of view is massively complex. We've just begun a programme of connected packaging largely to expand the experience of the brand. So your pack typically can become a service. You just got to understand what your consumer needs in order to provide a relevant service. But actually a core component of that is to map the recycling availability in every geography that we sell in, which is pretty much everywhere, and provide that information in a meaningful way to the consumer when they scan the code on the pack. So essentially what you've just described in Leeds, everywhere. But the ambition is to make that an open source database so that we're not the only ones that use it. Actually, come back to my point about responsibility, everyone should use it.
Great. Not a small project then, that one.
No.
Did you two want to add anything in?
I think just a little bit from us. So I would say that innovation, so the risk aversion is across every industry and every market. But there's lots of innovation already out there. What we need to do is we need to come together as a collective and realise that this is an industry or this is a sector issue. So we need to take that innovation and try and implement it across all of our corporates in one go, so that nobody's taking on that responsibility as being the first person to fail. That's a very new, definitely within our industry, that's very new thinking. But it's something we're trying to get to grips with. So the sustainability guys across all of the food on the go operators come together on a very regular basis. We're just now trying to convince or pull together our thoughts and ideas that we can then share them across all the industry and launch things in one go.
Carol, did you want to?
Yeah, well, just on the reduce and reuse. I mean, we do promote those messages as councils, but as we said, once it gets to us, it's a bit late then to, because we have to deal with what's there and try and encourage as much recycling as possible. In the consultation about consistency, one of the issues that the government's talking about is the chargeable garden waste collections. Some of you might have to pay for your garden waste to be collected. Now they're talking about making councils reverse that decision and make it free. Well, what will happen is all of a sudden the tonnage of garden waste will skyrocket again, because when we introduce charges, a third of garden waste disappeared. It didn't go in the residual bin, it didn't go in the garden bin, so a third disappeared. So people are dealing with it at home. And that is aligned with the polluter pays principle that the government talks about, and yet they want to reintroduce free garden waste collections for all, which will increase the amount of waste we have to handle. So I think that's a bit of a contentious issue at the moment with the councils.
Did we have another question?
Hello, it's Chris Radway from Circulonomy. I just wanted to ask the panel about their views on the deposit return scheme, because personally I'm a bit concerned about potential unintended consequences. For example, loyal recyclers making special trips to supermarkets to queue up at reverse vending machines rather than putting their deposit return beverage containers in their curbside recycling bin as normal. And also concerned that the main sort of cost-benefit justification seems to be based on a litter avoidance cost, which the figures for which in the impact assessment seem somewhat creative. So I was wondering what the panel's views on that were. Thanks.
Yes, I actually sat on the working group that looked at deposit return schemes. So it's a voluntary and economic incentives working group to do with the litter strategy. What we said as our recommendation that was more research was needed, and a couple of days after that report came out, Mr. Gove said, no, we're going to have deposit return. So LARAC's view is that we don't think there's enough evidence to support that deposit return in the UK will increase recycling very much. We're about to bring out a tool that's going to help local authorities assess what impact it will have on their local authority curbside collections. But I keep coming back to the consumer behaviour. It will be getting people to not put it in your bin at home, take it somewhere else. And then if a lot of people did that, you're going to need a lot of reverse vending machines. The smaller retailers are going to struggle because they will have to deal with them manually. That is all going to cost a lot of money. So who will pay at the end of the day? The consumers. And yet I don't hear anybody shouting, well, we already pay our council tax of £55 a year for our waste collection and recycling. Now we're going to have to pay another 15p on that bottle and have to take it back to get that deposit. I don't know, I'm not convinced deposit return is the answer to more recycling. We've got an established curbside collection system and household waste recycling centres. A lot of material could go through there. I think we need to put the money into improving that, which is more convenient for householders. As 81% have said they like curbside collections, it's convenient. And also, I think just a lot of the examples that they give about deposit returns are the European countries that have introduced them, but they introduced deposit return before curbside collection. We're the other way around. We're starting from a different scenario. We've got curbside collection nearly 100%. I think we need to think about where that money's going to go.
Yeah, so I think it's a super interesting question. For me, as a brand owner, it links to the last question. Because although we have, in the UK, we have a particularly good curbside collection, kind of local authority management of this, let's call it a waste stream, it automatically assumes that consumers perceive it as waste and therefore something to be disposed of. And I think although it works well in some European countries, the US has a good deposit return scheme for some materials, that doesn't mean that brands can't establish a return principle, but it's a business model evolution that actually might become something that is no longer disposable. I mean, one of the fantastic properties of plastics, we're kind of demonizing them a little bit today, I realize, but it's an incredible material. It's intended to be reused. It has amazing properties. Why on earth are we asking people to throw it away? Great, if they're going to recycle it, I'll have it back. But let's suppose a Vanish bottle, for instance, can easily withstand several hundred uses, I'm sure. If the individual brands provide a model that makes financial sense for the consumer to bring a bottle back, have it refilled, and take that bottle away again, your improvement in your sustainability impact actually is exponentially larger, because you have a much shorter journey for the consumer to go to their local centre to refill it. So I'm not shipping it from Poland to the UK, for instance. And you then keep that particular plastic bottle out of this recycling stream, potentially not failing for a much longer period of time. I think this is where brands have an ability to switch business models so that we're not clashing with a generic recycling scheme, but we are starting to make an impact on exactly this challenge.
To be fair, I thought you answered your own question really well. So as a collective, we've raised some of those unintended consequences as part of our consultation, definitely into Scotland, and we will be repeating them again into the English one, based on the curbside collection elements, but also the numbers that have been included in the impact assessment aren't perfect. And it isn't going to drive that much increased recycling. And we spent some time working with Valpak on this. And Valpak was saying, the guy from Valpak was really, really good and really candid. He says, the issue isn't food on the go bottles and cans. The issue is shampoo bottles and the bottles, the HDPE bottles that are in the bathroom. That, again, I keep talking about this lazy UK consumer. I will get lynched on the way out. But nobody has that thought process to actually take that downstairs and quite often put it into their recycling bin. And that's where the real opportunity for additional material to go into that recycling loop is.
I think we've got time for one more question. If anyone has a quick question. I have a very quick question that I might squeeze in. So obviously there's a lot going on this year, lots of consultations, lots of opportunity. If you could choose one thing that you think is going to make the biggest difference, could you tell us what that is, just quite briefly, what you think the one thing will be that's going to make the biggest difference? Who'd like to go? Go on then, Paul.
I think PRN reform will have a huge impact on the one, on industry in general, but two, in terms of creating funds to widen that infrastructure.
Great. Carol?
Yeah, making products more recyclable and streamlining the number of different types of packaging and getting rid of all those labels, please.
Great. Joss?
I would say it's connected packaging. As we start to coach consumers to interact more and have let's say a higher level or more qualitative engagement with the vessel that carries the product they bought, I think they will start to consider it more. So we then have that responsibility I talked about earlier to provide the information in that connected touch point that helps them to either dispose of or reuse or whatever is the appropriate use of that packaging after it's done.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you all for coming along. I think that's been really interesting. I think basically what we can take away is that we all need to work together. You know, no one's in this on their own. We're all in this together, consumers, brands, retailers, councils, manufacturers, and hopefully if we're all working together, then we can achieve some great results. If you'd just like to join me in saying thank you to the panel. Thank you. And I hope you all have a great trip home.